If we look at the Muslim world, Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, said in the late 19th century that Europe holds the Muslim world in contempt, but it is a world that in its golden age made even our 19th century look very late indeed. He recognized a certain quality in Muslims. He said that they are a chivalrous people that do not have a slave mentality. They do not have resentment. The disease of resentment is a deep-seated disease that the Arabs call al-hiqd. And it's something, when it possesses the heart, it can lead to the most heinous actions. Because people that are filled with resentment, when they find the object or their perceived object of suffering, they will often do what they can to attack and lash out at that perceived object. I can honestly say that my experience in the Muslim world, at looking at the Muslim world that I look at is the Muslim world of the millet system of Turkey, of Ottoman Turkey, when Christians and Jews and Muslims lived with dignity and respect. When Jews living in Ottoman Turkey actually invited the Jews of Europe, saying, come and flourish in the lands of Islam. When we look at what those who went before us left behind, we have to bow our heads in humility at their architecture, at their art, the fact that their domestic utensils are now sold to the highest bidders in some of the most expensive auctions in the Western Hemisphere. The very bowls that Muslims ate from are now seen as extraordinary works of art. This is only the inward state, because the outward is only an expression of the inward. If the inward is beautiful, then beauty must manifest. وَكُلُّ وِعَاءٍ بِمَا فِيهِ يَنْضَحُ. Every vessel from what it contains. In the Muslim community in this country, we have very serious questions that we have to ask. One of the questions that we have to ask is, why is it that so many Muslims have learned the worst of the Western civilization and failed to learn the best? Why is it that Arab television now competes with MTV? That now naked Arab women dance on television broadcasted from the capitals of the Muslim countries today, that compete with the worst and most degraded aspects of this culture? Why is it that in a film that was done on 9/11, that was done by 11 directors from all around the world, the only director that had a gratuitous sexual situation in the 11-minute vignette was an Arab coming from the Arab world? Why is it that we've learned the worst of this culture? We have not learned how to stand in lines. We have not learned how to prefer other people when we get on the buses. We have not learned those basic civilizing forces that were so common in the Muslim world, and what we affectionately call adab, or courtesy. And our Prophet ﷺ said, "Adabani Rabbi fa-ahsana ta'dibi." My Lord has made me courteous, and what an excellent courtesy He's given me. And the Quran reminds us, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You are on a vast ethical nature. This is the nature of our Prophet. And like the poet Ash-Shawqi said, إِنَّمَا الْأُمَمَ الْأَخْلَاقُ مَا بَقِيَتْ فَإِنْهُمُ ذَهَبَتْ أَخْلَاقُهُمْ ذَهَبُوا. Civilizations are nothing other than their ethical nature. And when their ethics goes, the civilization goes with it. So we have to ask that. There are people that visit foreign countries and all they learn is the foul words of the language of that country. That is what they bring back from their visit. In the Muslim world now, we see Muslims dressing like Western people. We see them now increasingly eating like Western people. We see them driving the cars of Western people. We see them increasingly be entertained like Western people. And yet we don't see the same commitment to the standards of excellence that exist in the workplace, that exist even in the government conditions. We don't see any of these things. Unfortunately, the West has mastered form, but what the West so deeply lacks is content. The West has mastered form, and this is something that we as Muslims have to learn, but that form needs to be infused with the truth of what we know to be true, the principles that we live with. The Muslims are a religion, follow a religion that's infused with celestial aspirations. We are celestial people. We are people of the stars. وَبِالنَّجْمِ هُمْ يَهْتَدُونَ. By the stars they are guided. The Prophet ﷺ said about Salman al-Farisi, لَوْ كَانَ الْعِلْمُ بِالثَّرَيَّ لَنَالُهُ رِجَالٌ مِّنْ هَذَا. If knowledge was in the constellation of Pleiades, there would have been people from this man's people who reached that knowledge. This was the aspiration that he was indicating, and this is a miracle of the Prophet ﷺ, because the Persians became some of the greatest scientists, some of the greatest scholars of Quran and Hadith. All of the great mathematicians that came from Persia, all of the muhaddithun, except for one amongst the great muhaddithun, came from Persia. We have to recognize that those who have migrated to this country have learned to function at some of the highest levels. Your skills have made you the envy of the workplace. Muslims are in the highest positions in managerial and in executive positions, and some of them own their own very successful businesses. We have become the doctors of this country. In Time magazine last week on the blackout, the doctor that was in the picture was Dr. Tanweer, a Pakistani physician probably in New York City. He was the one that was in the hospital treating the man. When David Letterman can say on national television, I went to my physician and he said, turn to Mecca and cough, and people laugh, you know that people now have Muslim physicians in increasingly larger numbers. There are over 20,000 Muslim healthcare workers, and if you're willing to put your life in the hands of a Muslim doctor, and you think that Muslims are terrorists and desire harm for you, then you're a fool. It's as simple as that. But the people actually know that some of the most excellent doctors in this country are doctors from Pakistan and from and India and the Arab countries, Persia, some of the finest physicians. Really, this is something that we should be very proud of, but we should also ask ourselves an important question. How is it that a religion that has less than 2 million followers, and that is the sect of the Seventh-day Adventists, who are a Christian group, how is it that they have 3 teaching hospitals? And we as Muslims in this society have yet to produce one major Muslim hospital. Why is that? And I challenge the physicians in this room, I challenge you to do this. And there's Muslims that unfortunately will say you can't work with Muslims. And that's simply not true. That is from the devil. That is from the devil. Not only can we work with Muslims, we must work with Muslims. And we have to set aside our petty differences so that we can work with Muslims. This Muslim community is young, vibrant, and filled with a potential and a core of people that can literally change the landscape of this society. We're the inheritors of a struggle in this country to keep this country in course with its founding principles. We are the inheritors of that struggle. Most of the people that preceded us suffered much more than we have ever suffered as a community. They suffered loss of life, including the Hispanic peoples, the Chinese peoples, the Mexican peoples, the Native American peoples, the African American peoples, the Japanese Americans. They have all suffered greatly. And their suffering enabled so many of us to come into this country and be treated with respect, being treated with equality, because people put their lives on the line. And we're not only celebrating the 40th anniversary of ISNA, we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of the March on Washington of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I do not believe that those 2 dates are fortuitous. I believe that there is a connection between these 2 great events. because we are now in the position in this country to challenge once again the very thing that Dr. King challenged this country in Washington, D.C., to ask the question, are you willing to live up to the truths of your formative declarations that all people are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?